Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Growth Vertical. Today we're joined by a special guest, Matt Bell, who has co-founded MessageUp, a company that actually assists B2B companies in growing out their content marketing function and how to actually make an impact in delivering the best content they can more effectively without actually overwhelming this crazy problem, right? When you scale up content, how much it overwhelms teams. And so Matt Bell and his company stops that from happening, but also increases the impact that they provide whilst doing so. Matt's actually really experienced in business overall, right? He's had quite a few accolades and specializes in the B2B marketing side, specifically around content marketing and growth itself. And actually, I think, well, the way Matt puts it, he focuses on digital first buying and selling, which is pretty interesting to me. And you'll see why when we go into the topic. But today we're actually here together to talk about how we can maximize the impact with limited resources in B2B content marketing and how any business, whether you're small, medium sized, how you can all actually get things into gear. So, Matt, thank you for coming onto the Growth Vertical podcast. It's great to have you here on the episode. And actually, it's a great topic, right? Content marketing's a thing. It's a topic that everyone's talking about. I'm sure you're aware of this as well, but during COVID, I think it's probably one of the scaling factors of content, right? It's probably the variable that pushed a lot of companies to actually say, hey, okay, fine, we'll stop ignoring social content, everything like that, and we're going to actually put some budget towards it. So before we get into the meaty stuff, tell us a bit about yourself and how it all actually started for you, right? Like, what's the story?
Well, thank you, Neil. Thanks for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. And yes, agree with everything you've just said. As a content marketing guy, I have to say yes to anyone that is emphasizing the importance of content marketing. And I think we'll come back to the why is it so important and the whole COVID accelerant that COVID was for companies to get into content marketing. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, I mean, I'm an odd cat in the sense that I'm an engineer by training. I spent the first half of my career kind of doing engineering-y stuff in the energy industry. I went through a phase where I was working in corporate venture capital, so investing in growth stage businesses. That was my springboard out into actually joining the management team of one of those companies and sort of cut my teeth as a leadership team member and eventually the CEO of that business, growing that business. So, and I did that for three companies. I was a CEO of three different companies as I went through my career. And that took me to 2019. And I decided at that point that I'd had enough of working for shareholders. It can be a very unforgiving environment. And I was doing a lot of finance stuff and HR stuff. And that was all great. And running a business it's a privileged position to be in. But what I realized about myself is that I'm a builder. I love to build things. I played with Legos as a kid. I became an engineer. It's about building things, and building a business is different. You end up getting pulled in all these different directions. And so I chose at that point to say, look, I've seen and done a lot of things. I think I can help other companies with that expertise. And so I turned my side hustle, as many people do, into a full-time job and became a full-time coach and consultant. And as I did that for a few years, all working with B2B companies, I saw more and more that they were struggling with this content marketing piece. And so this is starting in 2019, but very quickly, of course, is during the pandemic and beyond. And throughout that period, as you said, a lot of attention comes onto content marketing, and it really became,
Perfect
as
timing.
the title of my book, I think it became mission critical for growth stage B2B companies. If you don't get this right, you're almost invisible to your potential customers. And so I chose to create a subsidiary to start with, a sub-brand, if you like, of our consulting business that's called MessageUp, to focus really deeply on how do B2B companies, particularly smaller ones, get content marketing right, let's say, or at least make it as effective as they can with the resources that they have. And I've spent the next 5 years, just deep diving on that, written a couple of books on the topic, and yeah, I think it's really become my focus for the last few years, and it's been very rewarding. So.
Aside from it being rewarding, how are you finding it? Because it's quite a big space now, right? As in, it's so many shape and form.
I think it's interesting.
Content.
I still think a lot of the focus is on big company, right? You've got a marketing team and you've got these resources and you can play on many, many channels and you can apply all this technology and AI and still small companies are like, yeah, what about me? What do I do? And then to me, there are two categories of companies that struggle. One is the small growing company. They've probably raised their first round of funding. They can finally do some strategic marketing and they go, well, where do we start? What do we do first? Who do we hire? What are the things that we need to be doing to get this off the ground? And then there are older companies, more mature companies that have grown up before content marketing was a thing. They're like, well, we need to retool. We don't have these skills. We're sales led. We're boots on the ground. We go to trade shows. We don't do this content marketing digital thing. Help, so those two categories of companies are kind of lost and need a framework to hold on to, a guiding sort of path for them to follow. And that's what I've tried to put out there. It's still a struggle. Marketing is always going to be a struggle because it's considered by most investors, if not management managers, to be discretionary, right? As soon as there's a bit of a budget crunch, marketing gets cut. And that's because traditionally these companies, B2B companies, have been sales led. What generates revenue is sales. Sales runs the show. Marketing is a nice to have. They make pretty things. They make swag. They make banners. They make brochures, and that enables sales. But in today's world, marketing leads to sales. Marketing is what sets the stall for sales to come in and close deals and create the revenue. And if you're not investing enough on the marketing side, you can get in trouble.
I think it's interesting that you say that about more organizations being sales-led as well, right? I mean, I've been in organizations where they will have 0 on the marketing spend and they would have 30 reps, right? Just doing outbound, right? Yep. So it can get really tricky. And I think one of the things is, and you've probably heard these terms thrown around, but trying to get sales aligned with marketing. But I think, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this, but the alignment part, I think that word itself and by definition is wrong. I think it should be integration, right? Between both the teams, because there is a feedback loop in which marketers would rely on the sales team, right? In retargeting specific people, these prospects. Hey, what objections are we facing? Something as simple as that, right? Is it a budgetary issue? Okay, well, we don't have anything content-wise that even connects the dots between covering this to seal up that gap, right? Essentially, to answer the objections. Well, what's the cost of not doing business with us today? It doesn't have to be hardcore sales focused, but I feel like if you have that feedback loop, you're going to come up with these sort of content pieces, right? Do you think that content, the way it's seen, it's almost seen like you're climbing a mountain, right? They just look at content and it's like, oh yes, okay, we've got to get the most highest impact thing created today, but they don't really think about the problems itself that the users actually want, the initial value first, right? Time to value first before they do that. I'm guessing when you're consulting with a lot of businesses, you see this a lot, right? The problems.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're starting with an empty shelf and you say, what content do we need to put on that shelf to most effectively attract, engage, and convert and retain our customers, where do you start? Which is the most important thing to start with and fill it out. And you have to choose. You can't produce it all overnight. That's a big mountain to climb. You scale a mountain in stages. You don't just go whoop straight to the top. And everybody has to be climbing the same rope, to use that metaphor. I think the key thing for me has been to see it from your customer's side or your prospect side and say they go through a buyer's journey. They start out not quite sure what they want, not quite sure where to get it. They need information at that stage to figure out actually what problem are they solving? Are they solving the right problem? What is it worth to them to solve it? Should they invest the time and effort? If they are, they move forward and they start looking seriously at solutions, and eventually they'll wind up in a selection stage where they are choosing one solution. That's traditionally where sales starts, right? There's somebody that's in market, they're ready to buy, and I'm going to sell them my thing. I'm going to cut them a deal. But everything that happens before that, that's kind of the marketing space traditionally, right? Is like, how do we attract these people? But content is needed for that too. Content is needed at the sales stage, much more mechanical. It's like financial stuff and features and benefits and things all happen there. And then even after they make the purchase, now they're looking for information about, how do I use this thing? How do I get more value out of it? How do I fix the problem that I'm having with it? That's where customer support, customer success kicks in. Could be a third department in many businesses, right? So there's marketing to sales, a second handoff to customer success, but that's still content marketing. There's still content flowing there. And you can go one stage further to loyalty and say, how do we retain these customers? How do we get them advocating for us? We need to create content that they can share. So I think content has to be seen in this much broader spectrum So now I've just made the problem even worse. Now I've created even more pieces of content that the business needs. And the simple reality to me is this is a journey from the beginning to the end for that prospect. If you lose them in the beginning, they're never going to get to the end. So don't create content for the end before you've created content for the beginning, right? They need the information to say, is this even for me? Should I be doing business with this company? Most companies naturally have the content in the middle that goes into the sales process, right? You've got the spec sheets, or you've got the financial documents, or whatever it is that closes the deal. And then the next missing piece are the FAQs and the support information, the how-to videos that come in the implementation stage. So yeah, I think it's the alignment that you talked about between sales, marketing, and customer success, to me, comes from making a seamless journey for that prospect from when they first discover you all the way through to them being your most loyal, longest term customer. They shouldn't see any boundaries. And if you've got the team, however you label them, we love to label people. I'm a BDR, I'm an account executive, I'm a marketing manager, I'm a customer, whatever those people are, whatever roles they're playing, that prospect / customer doesn't see those boundaries, right? If those boundaries are invisible, you've got alignment. If somebody's getting dropped along the way, or if a customer is saying, well, that's not what I was told by the person I spoke to last time, yeah, then there's misalignment. And I think it can be hard to prioritize work. So yes, we need 5 pieces of content. We can only make one at a time. Customer success needs 1, sales needs 2, marketing, sort of early stage marketing needs 2. How do we choose what order to do these in? Okay, then there'll be a little bit of a bun fight, right? Somebody has got to manage that and say, don't worry, we'll get to it all. Here's the order we're going to logically do them in. And that's a CRO or a CMO or a marketing VP, or somebody is going to have to kind of hold the reins. And really, it goes all the way to the CEO. I make that argument in my books that the CEO leads content marketing because it draws on the whole business. Subject matter experts have to be contributing. Everybody has to be singing from that same sheet. We all have to be contributing to the effort to produce this content and manage it and use it. So it needs executive level sponsorship to overcome what we talked about before, which is that marketing tends to get sort of second billing. It's like, we'll do sales first, and if we've got some money left over, we'll do marketing. CEO needs to realize that's not going to cut it, and they need to champion this effort and make sure the resources are there, and to help make some of those difficult decisions when it's like A or B. Well, okay, it's A. It's my job as the boss to decide.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say this, and I was actually quite happy that you mentioned it about it coming top down, right? Whenever I'm working on a project, or we're working on any sort of account for trying to focus on content marketing, right, and roll something out. You might get this as well, right? And you could tell me otherwise if you had other experiences. But content marketing is almost seen like you can just outsource, and then they'll come up with the production part. Like they'll carry out all production part, all research, so production part, and obviously distribution. But it's treated like a bucket that you just sort of throw some money into, some investment into, and that's it, right? But honestly, it's not really that way. I think when it comes to the messaging itself, that refinement, that sort of going into the detail, we need a lot of that from the top down, right, part of the organization, because they have the vision, right? The founders have the vision. Like a startup founder, you don't know what the ultimate goal was. You don't know what the initial experience was from back in the day that caused this founder to come up with a solution, and which became a startup, and now they're looking for funding in order to get this solution across the market. So do you find that there's a lot of people that still think of content marketing in that way, that, okay, you guys, here's the content marketers, you take this, please produce me content, right? But we should actually, as marketers, turn around and say, hey, well, you do know you need to be involved in this in the very beginning. Right. I need to know exactly how you think. I need to know what the purpose of this business was in the first place, the solution, etc. And we can do all the customers, like we can listen to all the customer calls and everything that will do. But we need your vision, because the way we speak, the way we actually produce any content, the way we distribute that, and the way we actually showcase anything on your channel, our own channels as a company, our employees, but also from the company's channels itself, there's going to be a certain way we're going to speak, and that's going to come from the way you speak, right? Do you find that there's a lot of, do you think that there's like a gap in that area?
For sure. And we've made it how many minutes into this without saying AI?
Oh yeah, it's a
The AI,
record.
generative AI has obviously amplified this, where now anybody can turn out volumes of very well written content, but it's all generic. And so there's this rising tide of generic content flooding all the channels because anybody can knock out blog posts and LinkedIn posts and Facebook posts, whatever they want in huge quantity now very easily. But what it lacks is authenticity, which is what you've been referring to, right? Consistency and authenticity of voice. Does it sound like the company? Does it actually represent the point of view? And that's the second thing that it's missing is a point of view. Generative AI just goes and gathers information based on your prompt and writes you a nice piece about it, but it doesn't have an opinion. It doesn't say,
Right.
and I think all of this is a crock of whatever. I have a different opinion, and the future is this. This is where it's heading. That comes from thought leadership, and thought leadership very often sits with the people that have created this company, whether it's on the technical side or the business side. They have a vision for where things are going and how that might be solved, and they have some novel ideas about how to solve it. Those are the sort of unique opinions of the business that need to be shared. And so, yes, getting content out of the heads of the people that know it, right? That really sort of have the tribal knowledge of the business. And that can be, it doesn't have to be the CEO. It can be the technical wizard that's sitting in a cupboard, doing her job and not really being seen.
Yeah.
That information is at the heart of the company and is going to get shared in content marketing. It makes it very effective. So I think, consistency and authenticity are two words I use a lot. People's experience of your company, that's what your brand is, right? Your brand is everything they experience about it, whether they see it visually, whether they meet you in person, whether they're handling your product, seeing your promotions, whatever. That's all forming this image of your business. And if bits of that aren't quite the same, they don't speak with the same voice, they don't look quite the same, that just creates uncertainty in a buyer's mind. And the more consistent and coherent your brand is, the whole brand experience is, the easier it is for a buyer to process that and say, I know exactly who you are. I know what you do. I know why it's for me. I know when I need it. I'm going to store that in my brain. You'll be top of mind when they need that solution. Authenticity is becoming, I think it's like the word of the year now for marketers, right? Because there's so much generic content, so much AI assisted content, if not AI generated. And we as humans are very attuned to authenticity. We can tell when someone's not quite being genuine. We can smell it, right? We have the antenna goes off and we're like, you're not quite, I don't think you're quite what you say you are. And so authentic content stands out. We can tell, we can read it or watch it if it's a video or encounter it in the product and say, these people are straight up. They are exactly what they say they are. I believe they've got my best interests at heart. They're there for me when I need them to be. And so authenticity comes from that. So then to your original question, well, can we outsource content creation? We don't have the resources to make a lot of content in the company. So how can we outsource and tap into external resources? And I think you hit on the answer, which is get the key ideas, the key messages that we want to get across have to come from within the company. The brand, the style guide, the voice has to be defined by the company. But if you take those ingredients and share them with a competent content producer, they can then produce content for you that sounds like your company, includes your ideas, is in the correct voice, and they can do it consistently. So then you build a relationship with that third party and have them continue producing content for you. They will learn your voice, they will speak, and eventually they'll be able to create original ideas. But I think for me, original ideas, points of view, opinions, and the voice of the company, those are all internal things that we manage. They're our asset. And we then share those with external content producers just to increase our scale, that we can produce content at greater scale. The final say, the editing and the hit the publish button, always stays inside the company, right? That's somebody inside the company who is actually owning the voice of the company has to look at that material and say, does it pass muster? Does it sound like us?
Yeah.
Is this something we would have written? Is it written in a way we would have written it? If it isn't, it has to be edited or chucked away. It's got to pass that threshold.
I think with the way you mentioned, right, that we're really focused on, and we can pick apart when something's not authentic versus whether something is. But there's also that whole, when it's a business that's asking you to do so, there's that very like sort of let me build a factory type mindset, right? Because it's from back in the day, right? It's sort of set in the system. And so now every business is thinking, okay, let me just create this system for this system for this. And to some degree, that can go well, right? But when it comes to content marketing, I think there needs to be the added flexibility simply because messaging can change, right? We can, there's always a different way to articulate yourself, and there's always a unique, I would say,
I think the
perspective you can
goalposts are
offer.
always moving. So
Yeah.
why are we producing content? We're producing content to be helpful to our prospects and customers. Their needs change. Then literally their needs change. The role that our competitors are playing in the market change. The macro market changes. So there's constantly sort of these shifting seas of what information is most helpful and most relevant to our prospects and customers at any given time. So content that is highly relevant today might not be in 2 years' time. And we should be constantly like refreshing content to make sure that, it still makes sense in the context of today. Hopefully that's relatively slow moving. I mean, I think there are some markets that move. I mean, AI, let's imagine if you're trying to market AI. I mean, that's hard because it's moving so fast that whatever you say today, it's obsolete in 3 months, 6 months time. Fortunately for most business to business companies, things don't move that quickly, right? New products come out occasionally. The landscape changes a little bit. There's a bit of more focus on sustainability now, there's et cetera, right? These sort of macro trends that you can follow. But with those goalposts in mind, we constantly should be creating, well, what's the most helpful piece of content I can create now that will assist my buyer? And that, that guideline, I think, if we just sort of applied that broad brush across everything, will help us to create the right things.
Yeah. There's, I guess with startups, they're always on a budget, right? So they always ask the question, like, where do we begin? And you mentioned this earlier, and you actually gave a good account of how people can get started. Now, on limited resources, the way I always frame it is that you just need to focus on, if it's one person that's producing the content, if we're doing it through the founders or the CTO, whoever's doing this, yeah, okay, you might not need to hire someone straight away, but you just need to get one or two pieces out to see how they fare, right? And then you can bring in the content marketing agency or someone like that to help you, but then just make sure you create a feedback loop so that if you can't do it all in-house, at least you can get someone that can support you, and then they will guide you in how to do so, how to produce the assets you need. But your aim is just to essentially come up with a journey and a map, essentially, of what are the X amount of things that my prospective buyers and influencers what do they need to know before they reach my sales team, so that your sales team can have the easiest phone conversation ever, right? Yep. The sales team should be on calls with buyers, not with people who they think may buy or may not buy, if that makes sense. So I always say that you just want to focus on creating content like that. What do they need to know? That could be the problem, right down to how your product solves it. And if you just think about it like that, you'll automatically fill in the gaps between those.
Yeah. So I think lots of things wrapped up in what you just said. I think one part of this is there is a minimum kind of pay to play here. You can't do content marketing for free. You can try organically to produce content in your sort of spare time within the company. But there's two problems. One, you don't have very much spare time, especially in a small business. Nobody has any spare time. And the second thing is organic content. If you're on a new channel with not very many followers and you're just sort of putting stuff out there, you're going to get drowned out. So the reality is most growing businesses need to pay to get eyeballs on their content, because otherwise that content's just invisible to their market. So there's this kind of a minimum level that you have to commit to as a business and say, we need to spend a certain amount of money on marketing, and a certain slice of that needs to go on digital and on content, and it's got to be enough to make sense. Then, we talked a little bit there about, what was I going to say next? I'm losing my train of thought from the comment you just made. We have a minimum amount we want to spend, and then we've got to decide where to spend it. And I think there's a temptation to say, well, let's just scatter it across lots of channels and see what works, right? So we'll try and do LinkedIn and Facebook and trade shows and billboards and email and PPC. And the reality is, well, you already don't have very much money. And if you then dilute that down by spreading it thinly across channels, the chances are nothing's going to work. Or you're going to get a lot of noise and very little signal. It's going to be very hard to tell what's working. And my guidance is pick 2 or 3 channels and do them well. Put your chips on those numbers, and do proper experiments there to see, is this working? That leads to a question, well, how do we know which ones to pick? And the answer is, well, why don't you ask your customers? That's about customer understanding. It isn't about where you want to publish content. It's about where do they like to consume content. And so if I understand my customer well enough, I'll know, are they more likely to see me on LinkedIn, or do they spend more time on Facebook? Are they trade show attendees, or are they never going to trade shows? And that should gear where I'm trying to, to push my content. The last point that I want to pick up from your comment was, you said, well, we'll put content out there as a marketing group, and that will lead to the phone call with the salesperson that will be easy and whatever. But at the top of the show, we talked about digital buying and selling. And I think one of the big changes that has taken place, COVID certainly accelerated it, but it was happening before, is the shift from centralized buying groups. They're sitting in headquarters. They're all in one office together. A lot of them are sort of Gen X generation, to now those buyers are scattered all over the place. They're working remotely. Most of them are millennials, if not Gen Z. So we've gone from a very sales focused buying group, right? They're expecting to buy from salespeople, to a digital first group. These are now digital natives. They want the Amazon experience. B2B buyers are still human beings. Ideally, they don't want to deal with a salesperson at all. They would like to be able to go online, do their research, do their evaluation, pick what they want, order it, and have it show up. And that is pervasive. That's spreading through more and more and more items of higher and higher value. There was a McKinsey study a couple of years ago that said, more than, I forget what the statistics were, but something like more than half of the B2B buyers would be comfortable spending $500,000 online without talking to a salesperson. So that number must be even higher now, especially with inflation. So, if people are willing to spend $1 million on a piece of capital equipment or some software or a service, contract, sight unseen, if you like, without ever touching the thing in reality, we better be, as sellers, ready to deal with that. I think there is a future world where it goes one step further and the buyer says, hey, AI, I need a new piece of equipment that does X. Go do the research, go find the different options that are out there, get all the information, technical and financial, and bring me a recommendation that I can hit go. And the AI is going to go out to the internet and say, right, what information can I find? And if your information as a vendor isn't out there where that AI can find it effectively, you won't be in the running. You won't be there'll be no RFQ or published, tender or something like that. It'll simply be, an AI came by, it looked at your website, did it find what it needed? If it didn't, maybe you're excluded from that. Maybe you get an inquiry that says, hey, we can't find your pricing. Please submit it here in the next 24 hours. But so I think more and more, we have to think in terms of an end-to-end digital process and how we support that. And that means putting a lot of information out there that some companies are uncomfortable with, like pricing, like, more of the thought process that they like to keep in-house and use as negotiating tools, particularly within the sales group.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because there's a whole movement almost of, and you've probably seen this, let's just gate everything versus let's not gate everything. And now they're almost producing content that's very intentional, very purposeful, and leaving it ungated because they know in the background someone's doing their research. And I know that, we'll go into like that sort of order of procedure in a minute, but what would be interesting, or you might have seen this actually, that a lot of the review sites, i.e. G2 Crowd, Capterra,
Yep.
You'll notice that a lot of them are phasing in sort of value adds for content production. So like how you can use certain badges for your content marketing efforts, how you can use certain reviews as part of your, and you're probably seeing there's content marketing plays now, and the companies that are doing it well essentially utilize the reviews from those platforms. Like there's so many people doing, like you mentioned, they're doing their own due diligence in the background, and they're all fragmented. They're all spread across different locations. And the only way to buy is to be in those places. So if you're not there and you're not showing up, you're essentially missed the ball. No one knows that your solution was supposed to be amongst the top 10.
That's in that category of social proof, right? And it's back to authenticity.
Yeah.
A buyer trusts a review on G2 more than anything that I, as the company, write myself. So if I see and I'm using G2, you listed a couple of other examples equally good, but if I have a nice review of G2 and I make that available via my website, I'm saying, here, look, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There may be some terrible G2 reviews, but those have to appear as well. But here is a third-party directory of people who have seen my product or solution and have used it, and this is what they've said about it. And that's very compelling content. I think user-generated content, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if we only look at user-generated content, people have a habit of only posting if they either really, really, really love something or they've had an issue with it. There's a whole sort of sea in the middle of like, yeah, that was good. I got what I expected. I'm not going to make a video about that. I might not even write a review about that. It's 4 out of 5. It's perfectly exceeded my expectations, but it's not that, I need the world to know about this. And so we get skewed a little bit by UGC sometimes. But so the company still has a role of putting out content that is just balanced. It's authentic. It's like, this is information for you. The UGC provides some social proof, and people can kind of take that and leave that as they choose. But it's back to that need for authenticity, and where can I get a legit review of this product?
Yeah, it's that expertise, right, and advice, and putting it there so that they know someone else in a neutral standpoint. It's like, here's, yes, our solutions on this, but here are some others in case you're focused on these areas.
Same with testimonials, same with case histories that are co-authored with if it's a business in particular and they had an application, and they will tell the whole story of what it was like before and how we chose it and when we implemented it, what went right and what went wrong. Those are gold mine, because another user who can look at that and go, yep, I'm in that situation, and that's really great that they shared that. I won't make that mistake, and sounds like a good solution. Wow. I mean, that's kind of the best marketing you can get.
So in terms of like practical, let's move on to like the practical advice of things, right? So of course we've told everyone listening to this, you can probably go ahead and start to implement some of these things already or get things in order, but there is an order of procedure, right? And Matt, you probably have this, of course. You guys have your own as part of your business at MessageUp. But what does essentially an order procedure look like? So if someone has a small budget, how would they effectively start today? Like, what should they really be? What sort of content is purposeful, right? Like, what's important to get done today? Like, how do they decide that?
So we use a framework that has the acronym ABCDEF. So it's nice and easy to remember. And so before I get into that, let me preface it by saying, do your homework. Don't dive into immediately making the content that your sort of gut feel tells you is the right content. Lay the foundations, do the homework to learn what is the most effective content to produce. I think that's the biggest mistake I see a lot of companies making, is they think they know what they should be saying. And then when they actually go back and do the homework, they kind of go, ooh, now I see what we were missing. That's where we're losing people. Let's do that. So A stands for anchoring and authenticity. We've already talked at length about authenticity. Content needs to be anchored in the business. What is its purpose? What is its mission? What is its vision? It should all be tied back one way or another to that. That why is very motivating to buyers, to investors, to any stakeholders. Why are we in this? So get that right first. Understand where you're trying to go. Why are we putting this thing out there? People buy from companies that they believe in, that they trust. And so they need to see some of that coming through in the content. If it's just technical, if it's just salesy, and it's missing any kind of character, any kind of foundations, that authenticity is never there. So we need to do that foundation work first. B stands for brand. So brand in particular, in terms of voice, which you talked about earlier, and I think we all sort of know, well, we've got the set colors that we use, and we have fonts that we use, and we use a certain kind of images on our website. But then there's also the voice and the tone of the content, particularly in video and written content. Get all of that nailed down and make sure that's being consistently applied. Because another thing that will undermine your efforts is a lack of consistency. If it doesn't look and feel the same everywhere, if we've got a bit of a mixture of colors, or the fonts aren't quite the same, or we use a slightly different voice, that's confusing, as we said earlier on. So we need to get that brand agreed before we start making the content. Then we can move into C, which is not content, it's customer. The next thing to do is to really understand who is your target customer, your ideal customer. You're not marketing to everybody. You can't, especially with limited resources. So how do we narrow that down to the companies and the people at those companies that are most important to us? And then take those buyers and say, right, what do we know about them as they go through this journey? What content do we think they need or want at each of these stages in the journey? How are they feeling? What emotions are they likely to be going through that we can either amplify and say, yes, that's right, you should feel good about this, or try to assuage and say, don't worry, you don't need to be as worried about this fear of change or whatever it is. We can produce content that plays to their emotions as well. So getting a good customer understanding. And there's a whole process that we use called buyer's journey mapping, which is really trying to help to go through that step by step and really dig into what is it they need to hear from us, and which channels do they go to look for that kind of information. Once we've got that, we have the anchors to tie it back to. We know what our authentic messaging is. We have a brand to put on it. We know what it is that they need to hear from us, and we know what channels they need to hear it on. Now we can go make content. Now we can look at that list of things we've just produced and say, all right, which of these do we already have? Most companies already have some of that content, right? You're not starting from literally zero most of the time. So we can fill some in, right? Where are the big gaps? Let's prioritize those big gaps, and now we can work forward to delivery. So D is for development and delivery, developing the content and getting it out there. The starting point for me is to think about what resources do we actually have? What is a realistic production cadence? How frequently can we put material out? If we set that bar too high, we're just going to fail, and everybody's going to be disillusioned, and this thing won't work. So we need to work at a cadence that's sustainable. Both humans and algorithms like regularity. They like to know that if you're putting a blog post out on Tuesday, if they come back next Tuesday, they will find your next blog post. They don't want it to be every now and again when I feel like it, or it switches randomly between Tuesdays and Thursdays. Like, if you can have a regular cadence, that's more effective than the same number of posts kind of scattered around. Same with an algorithm. Algorithm is looking for, is this a reliable source of information that people go to regularly and use? Then yes, okay, I'm going to start promoting that content. So figuring out your production cadence, then we get into things like the third-party resources and, how can we get this done? That's a very mechanical thing of like setting it up. Then we get into delivery. Delivery is about channels. It's about paid media. How are we going to spend our dollars most effectively to get this material out there in front of the most people? Then I move on to E. E is evaluation and evolution. So how do we measure the performance of our content? What are the metrics we're going to use to see, is it working? It's not about how many followers we have, although that's still, it can be important. It's a bit of a vanity metric, right? We don't know why they're following us, but more followers probably means that you're doing something right. It's more about, how many people read this blog post? How far through it did they read? How many inquiries did we see after we published a certain piece of content? Seeing some at least correlation between our activity and business growth. Evolution meaning moving that content forward, writing about new things, figuring out how the market has changed, and writing about new things over time. And then F stands for following through. And following through is about keeping this thing going. It's about doing this for 12, 18 months without stopping, because too many companies do random acts of marketing. We'll publish a blog for 3 or 4 months, and then they go, it's not working, we'll give up on that. And then let's go to LinkedIn and we'll hype that up for a couple of months. Like, we're not seeing much on there, and they'll jump off to something else. And nothing works like that. It takes a lot longer than people realize. So you have to follow through. You've got to stick with your plan, your strategy, and measure it effectively over time, and then make strategic choices every quarter, every half year, every year to maybe adjust things if you can clearly see that something is working and something else is not. So that's my framework that I would suggest following at that higher level. And then, okay, we can zoom in probably on the what content or how to deliver the content piece. Was more your question, I think, is like, okay, we've done all of that. We've got finite resources. Where's the bang for the buck? My answer to that really is it's so company specific, because it depends on what do you already have and what do your customers really need? Where are you losing them today? Is it that nobody knows about you, in which case it's very much on that front end in awareness? Is it that they're seeing your content, but they're still choosing your competitor's product? So there's something that you're not conveying about your advantages over there. Your differentiation isn't coming through. Is it that people are buying your product, but then they're disappointed because they can't get it to work, or they're struggling, with implementation? Well, then maybe there's a focus there. So I think the what to do first relies on almost like a SWOT analysis. Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where do we see the biggest opportunities for content? Where are we maybe under threat from a competitor's putting out really good content? How do we match that? Using those kind of analyses to say, that's what we need to do first.
Till this day, I still run SWOT analyses before executing on any project. And I'm shocked at the amount of businesses that just don't run them to a certain level of detail
Yeah.
before they want to get on with any sales and marketing. That just it is mind boggling. And
I think between buyer's journey mapping and that sort of SWOT type analysis, TOWS, if you prefer to do it TOWS, I know some people like to leave the
yeah,
strengths till the end, otherwise you get too sort of into a sort of a thought bubble. But to me, one of the most valuable things that comes out of any of those analyses is when the group looks at each other and goes, we don't know. We don't know what our customer needs to hear at that stage. We don't know what our strengths are, or we don't know where the threats are coming from. And then that is the sort of red flag that goes up and says, well, then that's where we need to spend our effort. We need to figure that out. Let's go talk to some people and find out what do they think about our content, or let's do a deeper assessment of our strengths compared to our competitors. I think, sometimes the question marks are as valuable as the answers.
I think the framework is some very heavy practical advice, right? It's very step by step. So that, thanks for sharing that with everyone. And I think one interesting thing I was focused on, actually, we're going to go into the digital first bit in a minute, because you touched on something there as well when you mentioned the delivery part, right? And then keeping the regular cadence going. I always find that practically, if you were to tell everyone about how it would look, if you had a gap today, for example, and you were like selling, I don't know, a business management platform, right? And I think what Matt's saying there, if you have existing content, which you most likely will, there will probably be some form of research sheet you came up with, a fact sheet, or even a brochure. The brochure is the most basic thing that everyone probably has. It's like looking at that and seeing how much value actually articulating there. And I think exactly what you said. Every startup is going to be in a different position. I.e., you might be in a market that's had all the demand generated. For example, CRM, Salesforce. We know that they've done a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yep.
Loads of people know about CRMs, so you don't need to focus on education so much. You need to focus on differences, right? With more of your content. But for a trailblazer in a market where you might say, hey, well, all these business management platforms, they are business management platforms, but they might be just glorified quote to cash platforms, right? Or accounting softwares or whatever it is. That's the breaker. That's where you need to focus as a business. And you might say, hey, actually, we are an actual business management platform. Well, why? That's what you want to explain. The fact that you might not want to use spreadsheets anymore, right? Are you still using spreadsheets as a growing business? The fact that you might be using offline ledgers, whatever it is, right? So that piece is what, just for those of you guys listening, practically that's how you would think about it, right? And then you would go further down into the steps and you'd say, okay, well, what's my risk, right? For example, if I did continue using Excel, well, you could grow and then end up missing billing details, right? Or you could probably not account for invoices correctly, and therefore the business is losing some money on the bottom line, right? There's so many things that could go wrong. But this is the way you guys should be thinking about how to produce some of these documents, right? It's very step by step and focused from what the ultimate problem is in the beginning. Do we even need to talk about the problem because has someone already done the heavy lifting on the educational side? If that's the case, what's your comparison, right? Compared to the other existing solutions in the market. And so you might not to go into just example after example, but you might want a comparison guide, like simple matrix that you've created with the content team that says, here's everything our platform does right, and here's everything that the other platforms have missed out on, and this is why this is our USP, right? Our bread and butter. Right?
And you may end up, in some cases, selling your competitor's product, and that's totally fine. Because what you want is that the buyer acquires the solution that's right for them. And so maybe on this go around, they look at your comparison tool and they say, well, actually, this competitor B aligns better with my needs than you do. Thank you very much. I'm going to go buy from competitor B. That looks like a loss. But in reality, A, you don't want them buying your tool and being disappointed with it. That's bad for you. And B, they're going to think of you very favorably. And so when their colleague or peer, I should say, is looking for a similar solution, they're going to point them to your guide and say, I found this really helpful guide. Now, hopefully for that peer, your solution is the right solution. I mean, if you have enough differentiation, there's a market for your product. You want it to go to the people for whom it's designed, the people that it adds most value to. So I think there's always a tendency, or frequently there is a tendency for people to write these comparison guides kind of through a very skewed lens, right? They're very biased, and so is that authentic? No, it's not. you're twisting the facts to make your product look way better than all the others. Whereas if you present a very objective analysis that says, in scenario A, this competitor's product is the best, but in scenarios B, C, and D, you should really be coming to us. Boom, you've established authenticity, you've built trust with that buyer. And for the ones that you are most appropriate for, you should be earning their business.
And it's important to keep in mind that in business, we as marketers probably see it the most, I reckon, where you hear about a deal that's just gone through. And by the way, guess what, everyone? Your competitors are still trying to sell that person that's even signed with you. So,
Probably.
there's an aspect of some people just don't have a great experience with the competitor, but they still look at, hey, these guys still provided me with the information, so I'm going to trial them out, right? So it's never always lost, and your brand reputation will exceed the amount of time and the amount of immediate impact that you're looking for in a different form. So in more long term impact.
And they will speak to their peers and their friends and their network, right? So they might say, I evaluated, let's say, CRM systems, and I really liked this new CRM system. They did a great job. They had fantastic information. They were super helpful. But because of A, B, and C in our organization, we still went with Salesforce. The people that hear that from them may not have that Salesforce overhang. They may not have an existing implementation. They might not have a head of marketing that's been a Salesforce guru in the past, or whatever the factor was.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, that new product sounds really interesting. I'm going to go and look at it. And so even though they ended up buying the competitor product, they're still an advocate marketer for you in an interesting way. If you've done a great job of showing that you are helpful, showing that you are relevant, showcasing your willingness to support them, they're going to pass that information on, even if their final decision wasn't favorable to you.
Matt, you mentioned the delivery side of things, right? And you produce content, and it's never just one form of content, never just blog, and you have to push it out there. And today we do pay to play, right? The algorithms essentially command all right now, so therefore you have to give it some money, essentially, to give you some reach and distribute that content for you. But there's something really intentional about doing with content and disseminate that across multiple networks. And you talk about digital first. When you say that, is that where you tie into producing content that's native to a platform, right? So why is that important if it is that?
I think it's about the user experience. Each platform has its user base, and they're accustomed to a certain type of content. I mean, some platforms we're starting to see platforms cross over, right? So even, LinkedIn has videos and it has games now, and it's like, so they're all sort of blurring the boundaries. But the reality is Instagram is still the place where you would put images and reels and stories and videos, whereas LinkedIn is probably more factual, more text with something accompanying it. Clearly there's extremes to that, right? If I'm going to put my message out on a billboard next to the interstate, next to the highway, I have to write it in large font in very few words. That's very different from, putting a blog post out. These are two extremes of content length. The same message can be in both, but I have to think very carefully about how I format it. I think a lot of content, so you have written content and you have video content. Those are the two main buckets, right? And I think we can take written content and break it up into sound bites and chunks that are suitable for different platforms. Same with video, we can extract snippets and use those. So the key to me is producing those big bits of content that can then be broken down into smaller pieces for other platforms. Can you start out just writing the small bits and then maybe actually stitch them together into long form later? Yes. I don't think it's as fluid. I think it works better if you start with the big story and then go, right, how do we extract some valuable snippets from this, and what sequence do we publish those in that then makes a series? It makes sense. And it's easier to see that when you've stepped back and looked at the big picture. Maybe you don't write the long form article. Maybe you just frame it out and say, these would be the subheadings. We're not actually going to write it. We're just going to make little pieces on each of those. But I think you can get a lot of bang for your buck producing a bigger piece of content and then harvesting that for smaller pieces over a period of time.
Yeah. And I think that actually brings us to that point of scaling content, right? A lot of people think, how do you scale content? Well, this is, if you're on limited resources, something like taking a big piece of content, your video, maybe transcribing it, and then pulling out the key pieces of information that suit your goal, right? Of what sort of brand messaging pillars that you have that you really want to send out to the market. That's how you do that, right? Opposed to just building out a team straight away. You can say, okay, here's the team, right? In the beginning that you have right now, we'll take these X pieces of content. We'll still follow our schedule. We'll just repurpose these into these formats for these platforms that everyone can easily consume on those platforms. So if it's for Twitter, it'll be more news-like, right? It'll be more text-based. Video format, maybe smaller chunks of 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute videos on YouTube or something like that, whatever it is. And LinkedIn as well. So when you scaling content, repurposing is obviously one way of doing it. Hiring a team, of course, is another way of doing it. Are there any other ways really that people should be thinking about?
I think one that people underestimate is just reusing content. So if I push out let's say a LinkedIn post today, and I do the same post tomorrow, and I do the same post the day after, the chances anybody even notices that I put the same post out 3 times are really low. Right? That content has such a short life cycle in your feed. Now, you don't want to do that too much, because when they actually then go to your, let's say, LinkedIn company page and they go, well, look, you've just published the same thing time and time again. So maybe don't do that, but maybe 3 months later, you republish the same thing. You don't have to recreate it. As long as it's still fresh, you need to review it, make sure, is this message still relevant? Is there anything about it that dates it? If there isn't, you can go reuse it. And in actual fact, reinforcing the same message multiple times is important, because you can't assume that your buyer has absorbed that message the first time they see it. So actually reusing the same content multiple times helps to fill out that production sequence. So maybe you say, all right, there are 5 Tuesdays in May. I'm going to put a post out every Tuesday. It's going to be original content on the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th Tuesday, but the 2nd and the 4th is going to be content that I produced 2 months ago or 3 months ago. I'm just going to have that as my recycle sequence. Well, now you're producing 5 pieces for the cost of 3. So that's another way. Yes, you can always add resources, right? If you have the money, you can turn money into more content, so long as you have enough content. And, just paying it, as we talked earlier in the show, you pay a content producer and say, go make me content. The first question is going to be about what?
Yeah.
So they still need that. Now, if you've done your homework, you've mapped out the customer journey, you've created this library of content things that you need, until you've filled all that up, there's plenty of things to write about. You've discovered quite a lot of topics, and so you can use those. Once it's full, once you think you've covered absolutely everything there is to say, then it's into the evolution stage of saying, well, which of these are outdated? Which of these can we improve upon? Which of these areas has our competitor established thought leadership in? Let's go, what's our opinion on that subject? Let's see if we can put a piece of content out that, harvests some of that market, brings it back our way. I don't think there is no, unfortunately, I don't think there is a way to hack the cycle. Content production requires thought. It requires some time to actually create it. That has shrunk tremendously with AI assistant. So you can use AI to help do research and help, draft stuff out that you can then turn into authentic content. So that's an enabler. But there is a certain amount of human effort of reviewing and taking precious time away from the company that has to happen. So it's about really using as many multipliers as we can to, I get an hour a month of the CEO's time. So I'm going to use that hour really efficiently to download ideas and film him on video or her and capture that. Now I'm going to take that away and see how much I can make from it, because that's really precious time that I need to turn into as much relevant content as I can.
I hope you all that are listening or watching have realized that Matt's basically just had a consulting session with us. He's given us a framework.
Damn it.
He's given us actual steps that you could implement today, right? With some real life examples that we've thrown into the mix. And it was full funnel as well. So it's not like, yes, just go and produce a guide. Honestly, Matt, I think there's quite a few, if not all of them, were quite insightful, right? All the points that we've mentioned today. Do you think that there's anything important left? I mean, we could talk all day, right, about content. There's so much, so many facets to it.
Over the email before we
exactly.
The episode. It's like, are you sure an hour is going to be enough for this? Yeah, look, it is a huge subject, right? I mean, just that A to F framework, there are, 10 topics underneath each of those that we could start to get into and say, how do you do Google Analytics effectively? How do you know what people want? What are the, customer research techniques that we should be using? And so each of these buckets has a cottage industry underneath it that people are specializing in. I think one of the things that troubles me is that because this is such a challenge, there is a huge amount of, bullshit, BS stuff out there, particularly on social media, about ways to hack around it, right? Here's my proven process that will add a 0 to this, or fill your calendar with leads, or whatever it is. And I think, get over that, right? It's like those people are out to make a buck. They probably have something that works kind of instantaneously, right? You'll get some quick success because they're probably taking some of the things we've talked about and baking them into that process. But unless you invest time consistently over a long period of time, sustained success won't follow. And so you might see some quick wins, but it'll fizzle out, or you won't see very much and you'll give up on it and go, oh, well, it doesn't work for me. I think there is no substitute for doing the hard work. Lay the foundations, go through the preparatory steps, really understand what you're trying to do, and then start slowly. Don't try to scale too fast. When things start to work, people want to double down. They're like, great, it's working. Let's go on 3 more channels. And then they fall on their face because their resources were doing really well on the channels that they started with, but they stretched themselves too far. So scale with caution. If content marketing is starting to work, then just build gradually on that. Let it play out and let it grow. Don't try to force it to scale. I think we all read about, oh, I've done these 18 different marketing tactics. And it's like, yes, but you work for Slack. You have a 250 person marketing department. I have 3. So, we've got to be realistic about what we can accomplish. And I think a sense of realism, understanding what is achievable with your team, plus a few resources that you can afford, and make the most out of that. Set your expectations there. If you can achieve those expectations, you are being successful at content marketing. Yes, you could do it 10 times bigger if you had 10 times the resources, but you don't. So hopefully that allows your business to grow. Then you can go raise more money or generate it through revenue if you're fortunate to be cash flow positive, and then you can reinvest more in marketing. But scaling cautious, getting ahead of your skis, as they say here, trying to do more or be bigger than you really are is dangerous. I like to market a business one size bigger than it is. Tell a slightly bigger story than is true, because you'll grow into it and it shows ambition. But trying to be, vastly more than you are, do more than your resources can support, that's a recipe for failure. So.
Yeah, in the end, content marketing is a process and not a hack, everyone. So you just got to think about it like that. But Matt, honestly, this is
Don't tell me you've run out of questions.
I've got loads more. We can keep going.
Episode 2 coming soon.
I think also, we can definitely have you back on, Matt, because there's so much that we can talk about. But what I think will be valuable as well for everyone is if they, you've got some good material on this as well. So if you want to tell everyone about your books and where they can find them and what they are, then that would be great. And then I can link that for everyone as well. But I would recommend everyone look into these.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to push those out there. That's how I get paid back for these free consulting sessions. Book selling. Don't write a book to make money. Don't do it. Like the 0.01% make money at it. The rest of us do it because it's a great way to capture our ideas and form our thoughts and share them with a wider audience. So the website is MessageUp.com. If you go to MessageUp.com, in the top row, you'll see a link on the nav bar called Books. And that's got avenues to Amazon and to other independent book sources. So depending on what country you're in, you'll want to choose the appropriate link from there. There are 2 books. One is blue, one is green. The blue one is called Content Marketing Mission Critical. And that is really for CEOs, the senior leaders of a business, to embrace why they should own content marketing and how they should lead that process. The green book is called Content Marketing Making the Magic Happen. That is more for the team that is tasked with implementing content marketing. So starting with the CMO or the marketing manager and how they can take this baton from their leadership and run with it. There's a lot of overlap between the two, although I think if a team reads both, then they will speak a common language. And I hope that it works that way for the companies that choose to do so. So that's really if you're choosing between, which of these is for me, if you're in a CEO's position or a CEO or some sort of senior leadership position that's going to own this, buy the blue one. If you're in more of a delivery position, more of a marketing position, buy the green one. And you might want to buy the other book and gift it, right? So if you're the marketing manager, buy the blue one and give it to your CEO. And if you're the CEO, buy the green one and give it to your head of marketing. And hopefully then you have a productive conversation, because you definitely need to work together. There's a few other things on the website. There's a blog on there that I write a little less frequently now than I used to. I've chosen to focus on other things, but I'm putting blog posts out at least once a month. The last thing that's on there, which I'll make a quick plug for if I have an extra minute here on the end, there's another navbar link called Community. And one of the things that I recognize, and this is particularly for the CEOs that might be listening to this episode, CEOs of growing B2B companies need to talk to each other more about what they're doing. And they get trapped in their local bubble, right? So I've got my little network here in Houston, Texas, and some organizations that I'm part of. But I learn a lot when I speak to a CEO in London or a CEO in Calgary or someone who's in a completely different business from me. And what I'm trying to do with this community is bring CEOs together from kind of all over the map, different verticals and different geographic locations, into a closed community where we can really talk about what it takes to be a B2B CEO and our learnings, ask each other questions. Hey, what are you using for a CRM system? How did you choose? Things as banal as that. We're just getting it started. It's in beta right now, so it's closed. But if anybody is interested in being part of that beta or in joining the network once it starts, click on that community button on the MessageUp.com website and let me know. And I'd be really happy to talk more about it and introduce people to that community network.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
And find me on LinkedIn, Matt Bell. Pretty easy. There aren't very many of us out there.
I'm actually going to link everything the books, the website, and Matt's LinkedIn, so that if you guys have any questions as well, you can fire them his way.
Happy to connect and continue the conversations. Yes,
absolutely. Matt, honestly, it's been a pleasure, and sincerely, I'm glad you came onto the podcast, because there's been a lot of fire on the actual podcast today, and we've had just so many good ideas that people can actually take away from. I know implementing some of these things, I've either done a couple of them, or there's even things that I probably haven't thought about, right? So I'll definitely be revisiting the framework myself. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you once again.
Pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, let's see what feedback you get on this episode. Maybe that'll give us some questions. We can come back and do a follow-up in a few months' time. I'd love to be back.
Definitely. For those of you who are listening, thank you for tuning in. If you do like this episode, of course, show some feedback, drop some comments for anything. If you want Matt back on the show, go for it. Plug that into the comments, and then we'll.
And it's the good, bad, and the ugly. If you think it was terrible, let him know that too, and then he won't bother wasting his time.
Yeah, so just don't like.
The full authentic feedback, please.
But share it also with other people. If you find it valuable, share it with other people, other marketers, other founders that are trying to get started with content marketing. It'll be super impactful and super helpful, so that we can continue creating these sort of episodes. I appreciate everyone listening in, and we'll take it easy. We'll see you soon.